He was holding the envelope in his hands, and he could unstop shaking because he knew that whatever was inside would either save him or destroy the last bit of hope he had left in this world. His name was Marcus, and he was 17 years old, standing in the hallway of the most dangerous housing project in South Chicago, where dreams came to die and most kids his age were already planning their funerals instead of their futures. The envelope had arrived that morning, and it had a return address that made his heart stop the moment he saw it. But before I tell you what happened when he finally opened it, you need to understand how a kid from the absolute bottom of society even got to this moment in the first place. Marcus grew up in Building 7, Apartment 4C, a tiny two-bedroom unit where he lived with his mother and his two younger sisters in conditions that most people could even imagine in their worst nightmares. His father had been killed when Marcus was only 9 years old, shot 3 times in the chest during a robbery that went wrong. And from that day forward, his mother worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. She would leave at 5 in the morning and wouldn't come back until past midnight, exhausted to the point where she could barely speak. And Marcus watched her slowly break down year after year, her body giving out, her spirit dimming, until she became a shadow of the woman she used to be. He loved her more than anything in this world, and every single day he promised himself that he would find a way to get them all out of there, to give her a life where she didn't have to destroy herself just to survive. But the projects had a way of pulling you down no matter how hard you fought against it. And Marcus knew that every single day he stayed there was another day closer to becoming just another statistic. He watched his best friend from childhood get arrested at 14 for something he didn't even do. And he watched another friend get shot and killed over a pair of sneakers that were uneven worth $50. The violence was everywhere, constant and suffocating. And the worst part was not even the danger itself, but the way it made you feel like there was no other option. Like this was just the way life was supposed to be, and trying to escape it was as pointless as trying to fly. Marcus's teachers had given up on most of the kids in his school by the time they reached high school, treating them like they were already criminals or failures. And the guidance counselor once told him directly to his face that college was unrealistic for someone in his situation, and that he should consider trade school or the military instead. But there was something different about Marcus, something that refused to accept that his life was already written before he even had a chance to live it. He started staying after school in the library because it was the only place that felt safe, the only place where he could think clearly without the constant noise and chaos of the projects surrounding him. He would sit there for hours, reading everything he could get his hands on, teaching himself subjects that his school barely even covered. And slowly, very slowly, he started to believe that maybe there was a way out if he just worked hard enough. His mother noticed the change in him, noticed how he would come home late, smelling like old books instead of weed and trouble. And even though she was too tired to say much, he could see the small glimmer of hope returning to her eyes whenever she looked at him. Then one day, his English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled him aside after class and told him about a writing competition that was being held by a prestigious university on the East Coast. The competition was open to all high school students across the country, and the winner would receive a full scholarship to attend the university, covering everything including tuition, room, board, and books for all 4 years. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at Marcus with an intensity he had never seen from a teacher before, and told him that he had talent, real talent, and that if he entered this competition and poured his heart into it, he might actually have a shot at winning. Marcus felt something shift inside him. When she said those words, felt something that he hadn't felt in years, and that something was hope, dangerous and terrifying hope, that made him want to believe that maybe his life could be different. He spent the next 3 months working on his essay, every single free moment he had, writing about his life, about growing up in the projects, about watching his mother slowly die from exhaustion, about losing friends to violence and the prison system, about the feeling of being trapped in a world that had already decided you weren't worth saving. He wrote with everything he had, pouring his pain and his dreams onto the page until his hands cramped and his eyes burned from staring at the computer screen in the library. He rewrote it 17 times, each version better than the last each version, digging deeper into the truth of what it meant to be a young black kid from the ghetto trying to survive in a system designed to destroy you. When he finally submitted it on the last possible day, he felt completely empty, like he had given away a part of his soul. And now, all he could do was wait. Weeks passed, then months, and Marcus tried not to think about it, even though it was the only thing on his mind every single second of every single day. He watched other kids at school get acceptance letters from colleges, watched them celebrate and plan their futures, while he waited in silence, too afraid to hope and too desperate not to. His mother asked him once if he had heard anything, and he just shook his head and changed the subject because talking about it made it too real, made the possibility of failure too concrete and crushing. Then one morning in late April, he came home from school and found the envelope sitting on the kitchen table, thick and official-looking with the university seal embossed on the corner, and his mother was standing there with tears already streaming down her face, even though neither of them knew what was inside yet. Marcus picked up the envelope with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, and he stared at it for what felt like an eternity, because opening it meant that his entire future would be decided in the next few seconds, and he wasn't sure he was strong enough to handle whatever was inside. His mother stood next to him in complete silence, her hand resting on his shoulder, and he could feel her shaking too. Could feel the weight of all her sacrifices and all her dreams for him pressing down on this single moment. He carefully tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter, and the first words he saw were "Congratulations" in bold letters at the top of the page. And suddenly the entire world seemed to stop spinning as he read the sentence that changed everything. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as the recipient of the full scholarship award for your outstanding essay submission." Marcus couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except read those words over and over again to make sure they were real and not just some cruel hallucination brought on by desperation and exhaustion. His mother grabbed the letter from his hands and read it herself, her eyes moving across the page rapidly. And then she let out a sound that Marcus had never heard from her before, a sound that was somehow both a sob and a laugh, pure joy mixed with years of accumulated pain finally being released. She pulled him into her arms and held him so tight that it hurt, and they stood there in the middle of their tiny kitchen crying. Together, two people who had been beaten down by life, finally experiencing what it felt like to win for once. His sisters came running out from the bedroom asking what was happening and when. Marcus told them. They started jumping up and down, screaming with excitement. And for the first time in as long as Marcus could remember, their apartment felt like a home instead of a prison. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and preparations, and Marcus walked through school in a daze, unable to fully process what was happening to him. His teachers congratulated him. His classmates looked at him with a mixture of admiration and jealousy. And Mrs. Rodriguez cried when he told her the news and said she knew all along that he was going to make it. But even in the middle of all this joy and celebration, Marcus felt something dark creeping in around the edges, something that whispered in his ear late at night that he didn't deserve this, that he wasn't good enough, that eventually everyone would realize they made a mistake giving the scholarship to a kid like him from a place like this. He tried to push these thoughts away, tried to focus on the positive, but they kept coming back stronger each time, feeding off his deepest fears and insecurities. Then one night, about a month before he was supposed to leave for college, Marquez was walking home from the library when he ran into a group of guys from his building. Guys he had known since childhood, but had intentionally distanced himself from over the years. They surrounded him on the corner, not quite threatening, but not friendly either, and their leader, a kid named Dante, who had dropped out of school at 16, asked Marcus if it was true that he was leaving for some fancy university on the East Coast. Marcus said yes, trying to keep his voice steady, trying not to show any fear or pride that might set them off. Dante stared at him for a long moment, and then he said something that cut deeper than any physical violence could have. "So you think you'll be better than us now, huh? You think just because some white people gave you a scholarship that you're not from here anymore? You're always gonna be from the projects. Marcus, you can't wash that off, no matter how far you run." Those words haunted Marcus 4 days afterward, echoing in his mind whenever he tried to sleep or study or do anything productive. Part of him wanted to be angry at Dante, wanted to dismiss his words as jealousy from someone who had given up on life, but another part of him, a deeper and more honest part, wondered if maybe Dante was right. Maybe he was fooling himself, thinking that he could just leave this all behind and become someone different, someone successful and educated and respectable. Maybe the projects were in his blood in a way that could never be removed, and maybe going to this university would just expose him as the fraud he really was, a poor black kid from the ghetto trying to play dress-up in a world that would never fully accept him. His mother sensed something was wrong and sat him down one night after his sisters had gone to bed, and she took his hands in hers and looked directly into his eyes with an intensity that made him unable to look away. She told him that she knew he was scared, that she knew he was doubting himself, but that fear was normal and natural, and it didn't mean he was making a mistake. She told him that she had worked 3 jobs for the past 8 years, not because she enjoyed it or because she had to, but because she believed in him, because she saw something in him that was special and worth sacrificing for, and that if he gave up now, if he let fear or other people's negativity stop him, then all of that sacrifice would have been for nothing. She told him that leaving the projects didn't mean forgetting where he came from or who he was, but rather it meant honoring all the people who never got the chance to leave, honoring them by succeeding and then coming back to help others do the same. Marcus cried that night, really cried for the first time since he was a little kid, and his mother held him just like she used to when he was young and scared of the dark. The day Marcus left for college, the entire building came out to see him off, and it was one of those moments that felt almost surreal in how different it was from the usual atmosphere of the projects. His neighbors, people who had watched him grow up, people who had lost their own children to violence and poverty, stood on the sidewalks, clapping and cheering as he loaded his few belongings into Mrs. Rodriguez's car. An old woman from the 5th floor, Ms. Johnson, came up to him with tears in her eyes and pressed a crumpled $20 bill into his hand, telling him it wasn't much, but she wanted him to have it, wanted him to buy something nice for himself when he got to school. Marcus tried to refuse, but she insisted, and he understood that this wasn't really about the money, but about hope, about all these people seeing him as proof that escape was possible, that the projects didn't have to be a death sentence. His mother rode with him to the bus station, sitting in the back seat in silence, and Marcus knew she was trying to be strong, trying not to break down and make this harder than it already was. When they arrived, and it was time for him to board the bus, she hugged him one last time and whispered in his ear that she loved him, that she was proud of him, that he should never forget where he came from, but also never let it define the limits of where he could go. Marcus climbed onto the bus with tears streaming down his face, and as it pulled away from the station, he watched through the window as his mother stood there waving, getting smaller and smaller until she disappeared completely. And he felt like his heart was being torn in two between the life he was leaving behind and the life he was moving toward. The first semester of college was the hardest thing Marcus had ever experienced, harder than growing up in the projects, harder than watching his mother work herself to death, harder than any physical or emotional pain he had endured up to that point. He was surrounded by students who came from wealth and privilege. Students who had attended private schools and taken SAT prep courses and traveled to Europe for summer vacation. And he felt like an alien trying to navigate a world whose rules and customs he didn't understand. His roommate was a kid from Connecticut whose father was a lawyer and whose mother was a doctor, and he would complain about things like the dining hall food or the slow Wi-Fi, completely oblivious to the fact that Marcus had grown up in a place where having consistent electricity was considered a luxury. Marcus struggled with imposter syndrome every single day, convinced that everyone could see through him, that everyone knew he didn't belong there. And multiple times during those first few months he came close to quitting and going back home. But then something shifted during the second semester when Marcus took an African American literature course taught by Professor Williams, a black man from a similar background who had also escaped poverty through education. Professor Williams recognized something in Marcus immediately, recognized the struggle and the doubt and the feeling of not belonging, and he took Marcus under his wing in a way that changed everything. He told Marcus stories about his own journey, about how he had felt exactly the same way when he first arrived at college, and how he had learned that his background was not a weakness to be hidden, but rather a strength to be embraced and shared. He encouraged Marcus to write about his experiences, to use his voice and his perspective to tell stories that needed to be told. And slowly Marcus began to understand that he had something valuable to contribute that the wealthy kids around him could never possess, which was an authentic understanding of what it meant to struggle and survive and overcome. Marcus threw himself into his studies with a renewed sense of purpose, and his grades climbed from barely passing to near perfect. Over the course of the next year, he started writing articles for the campus newspaper about issues affecting low-income students, about the challenges of being first-generation college students, about systemic poverty and educational inequality, and his writing resonated with people in a way that surprised and empowered him. He joined organizations dedicated to helping underprivileged youth get access to higher education, and he spent his summers back in the projects running programs to help kids like his younger self see that college was possible. His mother's health improved dramatically once the financial pressure eased, and his sisters looked up to him with admiration and started taking their own education seriously because they now had proof that success was achievable. By his senior year, Marcus had been accepted into multiple prestigious graduate programs with full funding, and he had received job offers from organizations dedicated to educational reform and social justice. But more importantly than any of that external success, he had transformed internally in ways that went far beyond what any degree or achievement could measure. He had learned that coming from the projects didn't make him less than anyone else, that his struggles had given him wisdom and empathy and resilience that were more valuable than any privilege money could buy. He had learned that success was unbout escaping your past, but about carrying it with you and using it to help others who are still trapped where you used to be. On graduation day, Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma, and sitting in the front row were his mother and his two sisters, dressed in their best clothes, crying with joy and pride. After the ceremony, his mother hugged him and told him that this moment made every sacrifice worth it, every sleepless night, every aching muscle, every tear she'd shed in private when she thought things would never get better. Marcus looked at her and realized that the envelope he had opened 2 years ago had just changed his life. It had changed his entire family's trajectory, had broken a cycle of poverty that had trapped generations before him. And the lesson he learned, the lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life, was that sometimes all it takes is one opportunity, one moment where someone believes in you, one chance to prove that you're worth investing in. And that opportunity can ripple outward and change not just your life, but the lives of everyone connected to you. And that truth, that simple but profound truth, was more powerful than any force that had tried to keep him down.